So we are diving into some source material today that is, frankly, pretty extraordinary. We've
Hmm.
got this very specific firsthand account from a former U.S. Air Force test pilot, Walter Prosser.
Right.
And he details the secret, high-level briefing he says he attended back in the late 1940s.
Yeah, critical period.
And this guy, Prosser, he had real technical skill. He was testing specialized gear, like cannons, on aircraft down in Florida.
Before he moved to reserve duty in Indiana,
Yeah,
yeah.
he claims, pretty bluntly, that he was shown definitive proof. Crashed non-human spacecraft and bodies.
And that background, that technical expertise, is really our starting point for this deep dive.
Right.
Because our mission here is a bit unique. We're dissecting a single memory.
Yeah.
A detailed one, yes, but decades old.
From an event under a lifetime oath of secrecy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Prosser waited years and years to talk about this, basically for posterity.
Mm.
So our goal is to really extract the facts, the details he remembered, and maybe more importantly, the strategic insights he shared about what the military might have been thinking or doing behind closed doors.
And his profile just gives it immediate weight, doesn't it? Air Force test pilot, later becomes a metallurgist.
Yeah.
This isn't just some casual observer. This is someone trained for technical analysis, used to handling complex information.
And what's fascinating is the timing he gives.
Late 40s.
Yeah, Prosser explicitly anchors this briefing right in the middle of that early flying saucer flap.
Just after World War II.
Right after the war, yeah.
Yeah.
When the military was clearly grappling with all these widespread sightings, these inexplicable losses.
He even mentioned specific things, didn't he? Like the Bermuda Triangle incident.
He did. He cited that terrifying situation with the 6 Navy TBMs or TBFs just vanishing. It created this atmosphere of real, tangible concern that something was operating in U.S. airspace.
And it wasn't ours.
Definitely not ours. So the climate was tense.
Okay, so context is tense. And Prosser says they didn't just round up any pilots for this briefing.
No, absolutely not. He actually analyzed the selection process himself, looking back. He figured the attendees were pilots the military expected to, quote, make careers.
People they saw as future leaders.
Exactly. Future high-ranking officers, maybe generals, administrative leaders, the ones that they were grooming.
So this wasn't your standard mandatory safety briefing.
Not at all. This sounds like it was an indoctrination aimed squarely at the future brass. Prosser thought the group was small, maybe 40 people.
Ranks like first lieutenants, captains, majors.
Those ranks. And crucially, some of these officers were apparently flown in from other bases.
Which suggests it wasn't just a local thing.
Right. It points towards a more widespread effort, maybe to prepare a specific group of future leaders across the force for a reality they weren't ready to admit publicly.
And the setting itself. He said they were taken to a black curtained auditorium.
Yeah, definitely not a standard meeting room or a hangar.
Yeah.
Very controlled environment.
And before anything was even shown or said, the procedure was intense. Signing documents.
Taking an oath? A
Yeah.
formal oath.
And the commitment was total, right? Swear not to tell anyone?
One. He specifically mentioned not friends, not other pilots, not even immediate family, your wife, your parents, nobody.
Wow.
And he really felt the weight of that. Prosser said he kept that secret for about 10 years before he even told his own wife.
10 years?
Yeah, he's genuinely afraid of court-martial or dishonorable discharge. He stressed that, look, mandatory briefings were normal back then,
Sure, fault analysis on planes, how to react to a spin, maintenance stuff.
Exactly. That was routine. The completely unusual part, the shocking part, was strictly, in his words, what we saw and what they told us.
The security sounds just unprecedented for that kind of briefing. Sign the oath, risk your career. But the real shock must have been what came next. So let's get into the core of it. This briefing, led by a higher-ranking officer, maybe a colonel, what did they actually show these guys? How did they try to convince them?
Well, the central story they were told was about an accident involving a, quote, spacecraft of some kind.
That had crashed somewhere. Desert, mountains, maybe?
You thought possibly, yeah, somewhere remote. But they didn't just talk about it. They brought out artifacts, evidence.
And this is where Prosser's background becomes so important again, the metallurgy.
Absolute vital. He said on a display table were these odd-looking pieces of metal.
And as a metallurgist later in life, he wasn't just seeing weird metal, he was analyzing it, even from memory.
Right. He distinctly recalled the material was very shiny, but it didn't resemble any alloys he knew. Not stainless steel, not aluminum, chromium, nickel, nothing familiar.
And it wasn't just about the appearance, was it? It was how it failed.
Exactly. This is key. He remembered it wasn't bent or twisted like normal metals under, catastrophic stress from a crash. He described it as jagged, structurally just, alien.
And then the clincher.
The clincher. Prosser specifically vividly remembered they were allowed to handle the material.
Handle it. Touch supposed alien metal.
Yes. Pick it up, feel it. This tactile experience, feeling that unidentifiable difference firsthand. I mean, that seems designed to just obliterate any doubt that this was earthly technology.
That's a staggering level of proof to offer,
Yeah.
letting future leaders physically interact with potential extraterrestrial debris.
Okay, so the metal was one thing, but then Prosser saw bodies.
Yes. He described seeing several big glass containers, maybe 3 or 4 feet high.
Like glass chimneys was the description.
Yeah, like glass chimneys, filled with some kind of liquid he assumed formaldehyde.
Standard preservation fluid, makes sense.
And inside these containers were the figures, the, quote, bodies that were recovered from the spacecraft.
What did he say they look like?
He described them as small, whole, intact bodies, with limbs, naked, and very, very pale.
Okay. Now, Prosser himself added a really interesting note about this decades later, didn't he? About the specific features. He did, and it actually shows remarkable self-awareness, I think. He said his specific memory of the features, the classic big head, small body, large eyes, no hair.
The Roswell Gray image, basically.
Pretty much. He acknowledged that that specific image in his memory might have been, quote, tainted over the years by TV, by pop culture descriptions that came later.
That's fascinating. So he's sure he saw bodies, but hesitant about the precise facial details matching the later stereotype.
Exactly. And that self-correction, that honesty about the potential for memory distortion actually makes his testimony stronger, in my view.
How so?
Because he's committed to the core truth of the event, seeing small, pale, non-human bodies floating in these containers. But he's willing to question whether the exact details of the face got overlaid by cultural images later on. It makes him sound like a witness trying hard to be factual, not sensational.
That makes sense. He did mention their reaction, though, right? His and the other young officers.
Yeah, he remembered the shock, definitely. But he also said that for him and his fellow officers, who were mostly in their 20s, highly trained pilots, they saw themselves as pretty fearless. He described the feeling more as spooky than, like, paralyzing terror.
Okay, spooky but not debilitating. So the military shows maybe 40 of its hand-picked future leaders this kind of evidence. Unearthly metal you can touch, non-human bodies in jars. What was the point? What was the purpose of this secret indoctrination?
Well, it seems the main purpose wasn't really about the technology itself, not about reverse engineering or anything like that, at least not in this briefing. It seemed purely about psychological preparation.
Preparing them for what?
The military apparently told them straight up.
Yeah.
This phenomenon, these craft, they're real. It's happening. It's going to continue. And it might even lead to personal contact with aliens.
Wow, okay. So prepare for contact. And was there a directive? Like, what should they do?
Yes. And this seems to be the absolute core strategic takeaway from Prosser's account. The central directive, the non-negotiable rule they were given was, quote, never to be hostile at all.
Never be hostile.
Never. Prosser felt the entire point of that whole briefing, the metal, the bodies, the secrecy, was to drill home that these incidents were real and that military personnel must not, under any circumstances, create hostile, aggressive situations if they encountered these things.
That mandate, it speaks volumes about how the military might have assessed the situation, doesn't it?
It really does. If the primary worry was about human reaction, about preventing hostility, it suggests maybe they feared the visitor's technological superiority, or maybe they just feared the sheer chaos that unpredictable, hostile human engagement might unleash.
So if a pilot saw one of these objects,
The protocol was absolute, according to Prosser. Immediately break off, return to base, and then report everything in full detail, not just the standard bulletin notification pilots already got for unusual sightings. This required a deep personal debrief.
but absolutely do not engage, do not shoot.
Do not engage. Non-hostility was paramount. It sounds like it was all about personnel management, controlling their own forces' reactions in the face of something totally unknown and potentially overwhelming.
Given how intense the secrecy was and the unusual nature of it all, did Prosser ever wonder if maybe it was all a test, like an incredibly elaborate military drill to see how they'd react under pressure?
He apparently considered that, but he was deeply convinced it was not a charade. Utterly convinced.
Why? What made him so sure?
His conviction about the need for secrecy seemed profound. He truly came to believe that the public back then, and he even mused, possibly still today, just couldn't handle this thing.
He feared mass panic.
Yeah, he worried that releasing the truth would cause total chaos. Something like an Armageddon-like disaster was his phrasing. He seemed to genuinely believe the government was doing the right thing by keeping it secret, basically protecting society from itself.
And he remained firm that the evidence he saw, that handleable, weird metal in those bodies and jars, was real.
Absolutely. He believed it was real and stored away somewhere securely in military archives. He mentioned Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as the likely headquarters holding such things at that time.
And he hoped for validation eventually.
He did. He expressed hope that someday, maybe even in his lifetime, the story would come out officially. That he and, others who might have had similar experiences would be, quote, vindicated.
So, looking back at this whole account, it offers this unique glimpse, potentially, into a Cold War-era military strategy for dealing with the unknown.
A strategy that went way beyond just observation or tracking radar blips. This account suggests a high-level plan focused on psychological preparation and mandating.
Yeah.
Really mandating non-hostility toward whatever this presence was perceived to be.
And when you think about what Prosser described, the things that would surely sear themselves into your memory, it's those artifacts, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
That strange, shiny, jagged metal that a trained metallurgist couldn't identify, that they let you touch, and those small, pale, non-human figures floating in liquid, presented as undeniable proof to 40 future military leaders.
Yeah, those are powerful images. And Prosser, reflecting on it all decades later, he did views about something interesting.
What was that?
He wondered why the intense flurry of sightings seemed to decrease so dramatically after the late 1940s.
That's a good question. Did he have a theory?
He offered one possibility, just speculation, really. He wondered if maybe the visits occur in vast cycles, like in millenniums. Perhaps that intense period was one peak and then quiet.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a pretty provocative thought to chew on, doesn't it?
It does.
If this deep dive into Walter Prosser's account holds truth, if briefings like this actually happened, are we simply in a quiet phase now? Between millennia, maybe in some grand exploration cycle?
Or has the nature of the phenomenon, or perhaps the interaction, shifted entirely since the days when the military was apparently prepping its future leaders for non-hostile contact? Something to consider.
Imagine you're a decorated Air Force pilot, and you're told something so secret, so profound, that you have to swear an oath to never speak of it again. For over 50 years, a man named Walter Prosser did just that. He held on to a secret from a single, strange briefing in the late 1940s that literally changed his entire life. And this wasn't just some casual suggestion. For Walter Prosser and all the other young officers in that room, these words were a direct command. A command from the military they dedicated their lives to, and it was a promise he would keep for half a century. So, who was Walter Prosser? I mean, to really get this story, you have to understand the man behind it. His credibility is absolutely everything, and it's built on a pretty distinguished career in the cockpit. Yeah, see, Prosser was a serious aviator. He was a test pilot down in Florida, not testing new planes, but testing new equipment, like cannons they were mounting in the nose. He was even on the list for the Berlin airlift before he moved over to the reserves. This was a man grounded in the nuts and bolts of military flight, not some guy prone to making up wild stories. It's also really important to remember what was going on at the time. The late 40s were buzzing with this anxiety about flying saucers, stories about strange sightings, and planes just vanishing. They were everywhere. And according to Prosser, this wasn't just idle chatter. The Air Force's own flight corps was genuinely concerned about it. So, let's get to the event that changed everything for him. This was no routine meeting, not by a long shot. This was a summons for a hand-picked group of guys that the military saw as the best and brightest, basically the future of the Air Force. So picture this, about 30 or 40 young officers, lieutenants, captains, majors, they're all led into a hangar or maybe an auditorium. The entire room is completely blacked out with curtains, and before a single word is spoken, every single one of them has to sign a legal statement, an oath. And that oath was crystal clear. You will not talk about what you are about to see and hear, not to your friends, not to other officers, not even to your own wife or your parents. To Prosser, this was a command, plain and simple, and he honored it, carrying the weight of this thing completely alone for decades. All right, so the room is secure, the oaths are signed, and then the briefing finally begins. A few high-ranking officers step forward and unveiled a display that was about to challenge everything these pilots thought they knew about the world. On tables in front of them were a few different items. First, these odd-looking, jagged pieces of a really shiny metal, and second, several large glass jars filled with some kind of liquid. And they were told, point blank, that these were all artifacts recovered from the crash site of an unknown spacecraft. Now here's what gives Prosser's memory about the metal so much weight. In his civilian career, he later became a metallurgist. So he knew metals. He remembers handling the pieces and saying, with professional confidence, that it wasn't aluminum, it wasn't stainless steel, it wasn't any alloy he'd ever seen or worked with. It just felt different. And then, the officers showed them what was inside those large glass jars. Prosser's memory, even after all those years, is incredibly vivid. He describes these small bodies with heads that were way too big for their bodies, no hair, and these big, dark eyes. I mean, that's an image so startling it would stay with you forever, right? And it certainly did for him. But here's a really crucial point, and to his credit, Prosser himself is the first person to bring it up. He openly questioned whether his own memory of the bodies, the big head, the big eyes, might have been influenced or tainted by a lifetime of seeing similar images in movies and on TV. It's a really honest and important thing for him to admit. So all this raises a huge question. Why? Why show all this incredible, top-secret stuff to a group of reserve pilots? Well, the answer came with a very specific and very serious mission. The whole thing was framed as a training exercise. Prosser was convinced they were chosen because the military saw them as the future Air Force, the next generation of colonels and generals. The top brass figured these kinds of phenomena would keep happening, and they needed their future leaders to be ready for contact. So, their orders came down to two really clear directives. First, if you see anything like this again, you report it back in meticulous detail. They were supposed to be data collectors. And second, and this was the most important rule of all, do not engage, do not be hostile, under any circumstances were they to fire on these things. So now let's talk about the aftermath, because this briefing, which maybe lasted an hour, cast a shadow over Walter Prosser's entire life. It shaped his relationships and his whole view of the world. For more than 50 years, he kept that oath. Think about that for a second. Even when he would run into other officers that he knew were in that very same room, his commitment was so strong that they never, ever spoke of it. The silence was absolute. I mean, that kind of secret creates this deep, personal isolation. When Prosser finally did tell his wife, years after he was out of the service, her reaction was just disbelief. She told him, "Oh, you're making this up." So this incredible, life-changing experience was something he couldn't even truly share with the person closest to him. But right to the very end, Walter Prosser believed what he saw was real. He was convinced that somewhere, buried deep in the Air Force archives, the records of that day still exist. He always held on to the hope that one day, all this would be verified and his story would be proven true. So what are we left with? After hearing this incredible story, it really boils down to one profound question. Was Walter Prosser one of a select few who was given a peek behind the curtain, a glimpse of a reality the world just wasn't ready for? Or was he the unwitting subject of an elaborate psychological test, a staged event designed to see how elite pilots would react? The true answer? Well, that remains his 50-year secret.